Welcome to Everything is Changing. In each episode, we focus on circular economy, ecosystem restoration, energy transformation, sustainable mobility, and water resources. I am Ahmetcan Uzlaşık. Perspective is everything, and everything is changing. I co-host today's episode with my colleague Suzan Naz Üzel, our policy officer at Revolve. Together, we are unpacking a major shift in EU climate policy, the new emissions trading system, ETS2, and what it could mean for your energy bills. We're joined by Eleanor Scott, Carbon Market Watch's expert on EU carbon markets, to help us break it all down. Hi Eleanor, welcome, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, thank you both, and thanks for having me.
Before we dive into all our questions, could you start by telling us a bit about yourself and Carbon Market Watch?
Yeah, of course. So I work on the EU carbon market at Carbon Market Watch. And Carbon Market Watch is a climate NGO. I'm kind of a watchdog organization in the carbon market. So we push for it to be more fair and effective. And we do this through research and advocacy. So we work on the regulatory market. So that's ETS1, which is industrial decarbonisation, and also the upcoming ETS2, which is on buildings and road transport. And we also have colleagues who work on the voluntary carbon market as well on carbon removals. I work on ETS2 and the Social Climate Fund, which we'll be discussing today. So we work a lot with other climate organizations and also civil society, social actors. And then I'm kind of thinking how we can implement the ETS2 in a fair and effective way and essentially make it as socially fair as possible while also having the climate impact.
So today we want to dive into two important new pieces of the EU's climate policy puzzle, as you already mentioned, the Social Climate Fund and new emissions trading system known as ETS2. Some of our listeners have already heard of the EU emissions trading system, or ETS. That's the EU's main tool for reducing greenhouse gas emissions by putting a price on carbon. But as part of the 2022 revisions to the ETS directive, the EU decided to expand this approach. That's where ETS comes in. Well, these are all complex topics. Thank God we are really lucky to have an expert with us. So, Eleanor, could you tell us a bit more about ETS2 and the Social Climate Fund for our audience?
Yeah, of course. So the ETS2 is the upcoming, as you said, carbon pricing system for fuels used in buildings, road transport, and also for small industrial installations, which are below the threshold for ETS1. And the aim of ETS2 is to put a price on pollution. So there's essentially a cap on the total amount of emissions that can be polluted within the EU, and that's based on our climate target. And then that cap will reduce every year so that the price of pollution gradually increases. And the idea is that this should reflect the true costs of fossil fuels and also incentivize changes in behavior. So make it more attractive to switch to electric vehicles, install heat pumps and solar panels. And also a really important role of the ETS2 is to raise money to finance investment in clean energy and create more affordable alternatives to fossil fuels. So under the ETS2, the cost is paid by regulated entities. So that's fossil fuel companies. So whoever supplies you with energy in your home, like Total Energies or Engie. But then this cost is then passed on to consumers in the form of higher energy bills. So kind of one of the acknowledgement of this kind of increased social cost is in the creation of the Social Climate Fund. So this was created to address any additional burden in increases in energy and transport poverty as a consequence of ETS2. So about 86.7 billion, if we include member state co-financing of 25%, will be made available to combat energy and transport poverty. So to access these funds, member states have to submit national social climate plans, which are due very soon. They're due in June. And these plans should outline basically who in the country is experiencing energy and transport poverty. How can we help these people? How can we design measures that will channel the funds of the Social Climate Fund to them and allow them to have affordable access to a clean energy alternative? So basically 37% of the fund can be spent on providing income support. So essentially direct payments to help with bills. A small amount, 2%, can be spent on technical support. So setting up one-stop shops to tell people about the options they have for decarbonizing their homes and their transport. And the rest can then be spent on providing long-term solutions. So that's direct retrofitting, installation of clean energy infrastructure, and then also providing zero energy transport options.
What are the main challenges ETS2 faces? Could it still disproportionately impact low-income households, even with the social climate fund in place?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, this is a huge concern when it comes to ETS2 and carbon pricing generally. Because we do know that lower income households spend a higher proportion of their income on energy. And affordable alternatives will need to be made available for those who can afford them. So one way we can do this is through the Social Climate Fund, but another way is through the wider ETS2 revenue. So if we consider that Social Climate Fund is capped at 86.7 billion, ETS2 revenue will be a lot bigger. So at without getting too technical, but at a carbon price of €45 a tonne, we can expect around €260 billion to be raised in the first 5 years of the ETS2, and this will all be returned to member states. Now, according to the latest revision of the ETS, 100% of this revenue will have to be spent on climate action, but it's really up to member states how they spend it. So one thing we advocate for at Carbon Market Watch is dedicating all this revenue to socially targeted investments to provide affordable alternatives in homes and in transport. So we would advocate for using quite a chunk of this fund, maybe around 25%, to provide income support for lowest income households, while the other investments are put in place. So that way people can manage any kind of impact on their bills until there's affordable alternatives in place. But we do still face other challenges. For example, the June deadline for the social climate plans coming up very, very quickly. And member states really need to show that they've done a strong consultation and also accurate targeting. But there are data gaps, especially around, who makes up those in energy poverty. Often these people are a little bit hard to target. They may face a lack of access to information. Another kind of key area in ensuring that there isn't an overburdening on citizens is really not relying on the ETS2 to deliver all emissions reductions in building and road transport. It's really one piece of a wider puzzle, which is why it's an important piece of the Fit for 55 package, but it's not in any way the whole pie, let's say. So complementary measures like the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive and the CO2 standards for cars, all these policies have a very important role in lowering emissions and essentially lowering the demand for pollution. So if we see a lower demand for pollution in ETS2, we'll see a lower ETS2 price. And that's really, really important. I think what's also interesting to consider is 2 countries in Europe make up about 50% of the emissions in ETS2, France and Germany. So what happens in these countries will really have a huge impact on the price felt all across the Union. So I think the Commission, the EU really need to kind of assist these countries in making sure they're meeting their effort sharing targets, particularly in road transport, which makes up a huge portion of the emissions in ETS2. And then we can also consider that these complementary policies can be have also kind of equitable dimensions. So, for example, in the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, there's a big focus on the worst performing houses. And these are really often occupied by people who are in energy poverty. So making sure that these are benefiting from retrofitting schemes will have a huge impact on minimizing any kind of social impact of ETS2. I think also when we consider this discussion, it's also really kind of critical to recognize that the current system that we have is broken in terms of energy poverty. Like in Europe, over 40 million people are unable to heat their homes. And we saw in the energy price crisis that fossil fuel companies were very willing to extract windfall profits kind of in this time of crisis. So we really have to break this cycle of reliance on dirty energy. And the ETS2 is an important tool to kind of incentivize this change, provide revenue for this change, but it certainly isn't going to do it in isolation. We still need social support. We need other investment, and we definitely still need like standards. So it's definitely not the time to roll back all these things, which is a bit of a worrying trend that we're seeing at the minute.
You mentioned that ETS2 is just one piece of the puzzle. Given the geopolitical challenges and energy price volatility, do you think the Affordable Energy Action Plan presented under the Clean Industrial Deal can complement ETS2? And are there any additional short-term measures needed?
Yeah, thank you. Great question. I think from a positive kind of angle, it's very good that the Commission is kind of taking the issue of energy affordability more seriously. We're really seeing this as a key voter concern. It's really linked to the cost of living crisis. And it's really positive that we're seeing kind of an approach that links the climate and social side of environmental policy together. Another positive thing is we're seeing a focus on the need to limit high electricity prices. So as ETS2 comes into force, it's really important that all the other kind of market signals align with the ETS2 price signal. So we need, basically a shift in the taxation on electricity to make heat pumps and electric vehicles more of an attractive option. And also the plan kind of highlights the need to invest further in the grid, which is also an essential part of the success of ETS2. But what is quite disappointing in terms of the contents of the Affordable Energy Action Plan is that there's no mention of ETS2 directly, even though it's really starting quite soon and member states need to urgently prepare and really link to the issue of affordable energy prices. Also, what is quite worrying is that there's a commitment to invest further in gas infrastructure. And we all know that any further investment in fossil fuel infrastructure puts people at risk. And also from an energy pricing perspective, gas is extremely volatile and renewable energy can provide a lot more an affordable alternative for people in the long term. So there's positives and kind of areas for improvement in the action plan. But I do think it represents a kind of a good step in the kind of next generation of climate policy that we're entering, where we're really seeing the impact on people.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for mentioning how the Affordable Energy Action Plan lacks, actually, and that it doesn't mention ETS2. And you mentioned it's member states' responsibility to implement this. And I'd like to ask, how can the member states ensure that ETS2 is implemented fairly and effectively, particularly in countries that rely heavily on fossil fuels? Are there any examples of good implementation?
Yeah, very good question again. I think, we do see a different kind of mix of fossil fuel usage in different member states, and that requires more attention. For example, in Poland, there's quite a large proportion of coal users, and that's very carbon intense, and they're likely to be hit the hardest first. So it's very important that these people are provided with alternative options early, or kind of, income support until those options can be put in place. In terms of good implementation, I think it starts probably with strong social climate plans. They're due in June. We need to see a very strong consultation with stakeholders, as well as effective targeting for those in energy and transport poverty. But as we mentioned, the Social Climate Fund is quite limited in size. So we really need to see a ramp up of investment in socially targeted renovations, building decarbonisation and zero emissions public transport options, starting from now. So the Social Climate Fund starts in 2026, where member states can access the undersubscribed Recovery and Resilience Fund or the Cohesion Fund and kind of effectively front load their ETS2 revenue. Like, they know the money is coming from 2027, so may as well start preparing now and actually put the measures in place. Beyond this, we also are calling for a commitment to spend all the ETS2 revenue on making kind of switching to clean energy alternatives, buildings and transport as affordable as possible. So that might be affordable financing for middle income earners, and then direct grants for lower income earners, and also putting income support measures in place in the transitionary period. So in terms of good practices, we've seen the Commission come out with some good practices for social climate fund spending that are really kind of also applicable for ETS2 spending. So social tariffs for energy, social leasing of electric vehicles. We saw a very promising program in France, which allows people to access and have their own electric vehicle basically for a monthly rate of around, I think it started from €50, and that income tested. And then also we're seeing a lot of kind of policy innovation in the area of ensuring that tenants' rights are protected, and that kind of landlords are incentivized to provide retrofitting and heat pumps in rented buildings. And then I guess we're turning to the point of, ensuring that the political pressure right now does not result in the watering down of complementary measures. So basically, member states cannot just rely on ETS2. Doing that will lead to high prices, and that will lead to social frustration with the system. We cannot do this basically with ETS2 alone. And then I think lastly, I would urge anyone listening who's interested in the topic or views ETS2 as kind of an important step to start communicating about it. I think, as we've seen in France and in Canada, kind of carbon pricing can become politicized. Essentially, it's something that can really be kind of caught up between the politicization of climate policy in general. And yeah, I just think that a lack of communication will really, set the system up for failure. So I think if we can all start talking about it and, thinking how we can make it work for us at a national level.
Thank you, Eleanor, for your informative answers and being with us today.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, guys.
That's it for today's episode. A big thank you to Eleanor Scott for sharing her insights and to my co-host, Suzanna Züzel. We will be following how ETS2 takes shape across Europe and its impact on citizens and climate goals. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to subscribe and share. Don't forget that perspective is everything, and everything is changing. See you next time.